"My wife took her own life," declared Rasel Faria during a conversation with the 911 dispatcher. 911. The law enforcement officers and medics who arrived at the scene immediately refuted the man's statement. After all, they found more than 50 stab wounds on his wife's body, and at the time of their arrival, a knife was still sticking out of the victim's neck. Come on, that doesn't really look like someone took their own life. However, if you've already imagined the standard true crime story, where a husband takes his wife's life, then calls emergency services and pretends to be a grieving widower, I ask you not to jump to conclusions, because the story I'm going to tell you today can easily compete with even the most twisted Hollywood scripts. It's truly a gruesome yet no less fascinating case, so... On December 27, 2011, 41-year-old Rasel Faria returned home after spending time with friends. It was around 9:40 post-meridian when the man entered his house in the city of Troy, Missouri. Rasel knew that his wife, 42-year-old Elizabeth, or as her friends called her, Betsy, was waiting for him at home. At that time, the Faria couple had been married for about 10 years. The couple did not have any children together, but they were raising Betsy's 2 daughters from her previous relationship. In their married life, Rasel and Betsy had both ups and downs, basically nothing out of the ordinary. Several times, the couple even separated for a short period. One of these breakups happened in 2006. Shortly after that, doctors diagnosed Betsy with breast cancer. Such a terrible diagnosis became the reason for the couple to get back together. It's actually really cool because often couples break up under such circumstances. Surprisingly, even despite his wife's illness, Rasel claims that it was during that period that his marriage with Betsy reached a new level. Those years became their happiest together. Interestingly, after my cancer, I say this with a smile because it's in the past, I was on antidepressants for 2 years. It's not something to be proud of, but there's nothing to be ashamed of either. It's strange, but let it be. For the first time in a while, I'm without the pills, one way or another. The doctor immediately advised me to combine treatment like pills with therapy, which is exactly what I did. That was good advice. With my ups and downs, I'm making gradual, I would even say very gradual, progress. There are more ups than downs now, although not by much. I once believed psychotherapy wasn't for me. Now I would say it a bit differently. It just wasn't for me back then, at that time. As you know, everything has its own time and place. But one way or another, it was therapy that helped me not just to hold on, but to understand myself, and I don't even know how to put it right. Well, kind of to finally exhale.
That's exactly the word.
As I've mentioned in previous videos, the key advice is simply not to be afraid. If you have a trustworthy person, go for it. In 2010, Betsy had surgery to remove her mammary gland, and at that time, it seemed that the cancer had retreated. However, already in 2011, during a routine examination, doctors discovered metastases in the patient's liver. In connection with this, the doctor's prognosis turned out to be very disappointing. In the best-case scenario, the woman had only a few years left to live. Despite this, Rasel and Betsy remained optimistic. In November 2011, they set off together on a journey they called the Celebration of Life. During this trip, Betsy fulfilled her long-held dream. She swam with dolphins. The trip took place about a month before Rasel Faria came home one evening from visiting friends and found his wife in a pool of blood. When Rasel first entered the room, he initially thought that his wife had fallen ill. He ran up to her and saw blood, slashed wrists, and the handle of a kitchen knife sticking out of his beloved's neck. Then Rasel realized that Betsy was already dead and immediately called emergency services. Through tears, the man told the 911 dispatcher that his wife had taken her own life. At that moment, Rasel thought exactly of this version of Betsy's death, because earlier, after hearing the news about the return of cancer, his wife had brought up the topic of taking her own life several times in conversations with him. Some sources also claim that she not only talked about it, but even once tried to take her own life. But most likely, it's censored here because YouTube really doesn't like these kinds of topics. Despite this, the law enforcement officers who arrived that evening at the Faria family's house quickly concluded that in fact Betsy had been brutally murdered. This was indicated by 55 stab wounds. Most of them turned out to be extremely deep, and some even reached the bone. The cuts were such that it would be difficult or even impossible to inflict them on oneself. The woman's throat was cut, her left eye was stabbed with a knife, with the blade driven all the way to the skull. She also suffered multiple wounds to the chest and abdomen, which in turn caused severe damage to internal organs, including the lungs, liver, and spleen. The experts who examined the victim's body were able to determine that by the time they arrived, Betsy had already been dead for at least an hour. During the search among the couple's belongings, law enforcement officers found Rasel's house slippers, which was stained with blood and appeared to have been hastily thrown into the closet. This, like the man's overall behavior, raised suspicions among the police about his involvement in this crime. The first officer who arrived at Farid's house that evening noted that Rasel looked very upset, was crying, panicking, breathing heavily, and could barely even speak. The 911 dispatcher who spoke with Rasel on the phone confirmed this testimony, but emphasized that when he asked the man to calm down, he seemed to instantly regain his composure. Another officer recounted how he sat with Rasel in the police car and tried to distract him with conversation about something else, just not about his wife's death. So, according to the officer, during this time, Rasel behaved completely normally and at one point even laughed. Later, at the station where the man was taken for questioning, a surveillance camera recorded him sitting alone and whispering, "No. Sometimes," says Betsy, "he cries and prays." Sometime after this video was recorded, a 10-hour interrogation of Rasel took place. During this time, the man kept his composure, communicated appropriately, and constantly emphasized that he was not in the house at the time of the murder, and that he didn't touch his wife at all. Such unstable behavior by the man only increased the suspicions of law enforcement regarding his involvement in the murder of Betsy. During his conversation with the cops, Rasel said that on the day of the murder he was just at work until 5 p.m. And after finishing, the man called Betsy. After talking to her, he went to his friend's where he stayed until 9 p.m. And before returning home, he stopped to grab a bite at one of the local places. Well, these statements were confirmed both by the man's friends and by other witnesses who saw him at all the places he described. Continuing his story, Rasel talked about how he went out to his house. He insisted on this point. At that moment, Betsy was already dead, and as soon as he realized this, he immediately called an ambulance. Rasel was offered to take a polygraph test, which was supposed to confirm his story, but he failed it. Another key piece of evidence pointing to Rasel's guilt was the testimony of Betsy's close friend, Pamela Hupp. The woman told law enforcement that on the day of Betsy's death, around 6:30 in the evening, she picked up her friend from the cancer center and drove her home. So, according to Pamela, during the drive, they discussed Betsy's plans to move to Lake St. Louis to her mother's house. This idea had been on the woman's mind for a long time, and that evening, she was planning to share it with Rasel. She was very afraid of how he would react. Around 7 in the evening, when the friends drove up to the Faria family's house, Pamela, as she says, felt a fear of getting lost. She didn't want to leave her alone with Rasel because she knew he had a very unpredictable and aggressive character. And at his wife's request to move, he could, let's say, react very negatively. In general, Pamela described Rasel as a cruel, hysterical, and very greedy man who constantly humiliated his wife and openly abused her. During her testimony, she also recalled a letter that Betsy had promised to send her by mail, but she never did it. The woman emphasized that this email could prove very useful in the investigation since, as she understood from her conversation with Betsy, in it Betsy described how much she was afraid of her husband. The police later did find a similar unsent letter on the laptop that belonged to the deceased.
I really feel that Rasel is planning to do something to me. He kept telling me how much money he would get after my death. Last night was the worst. I fell asleep on the couch and I woke up because Rasel was holding a pillow near my face. He said he wanted me to know what death feels like. I should change my life insurance policy. Do you think I could make you the beneficiary? You could help my daughters if they ever need it. And if something happens to me, please show this letter to the police.
Besides that, Pamela told the police that 5 days before her death, on December 27, 2011, Betsy, after returning from her husband, changed the beneficiary of her insurance policy, which was worth $150,000. Previously, Rasel was the beneficiary, but Betsy asked Pamela to replace him. She explained her actions by saying that she was very afraid that Rasel would spend all that money just on himself. According to Pamela, her friend also complained to her that during arguments with his wife, Rasel constantly emphasized that he would get a lot of money after his wife's death, while she, in turn, wanted all the money to go to her children. Since the girls were still minors at that time, it was impossible to make them beneficiaries. So the woman decided to transfer everything to a close friend, in whom she was 100% confident. According to Betsy's will, Pamela was supposed to inherit all the money after her death and pass it on to the girls. Well, when they grow up, thanks to these testimonies, law enforcement quickly established the motive for the crime. They believed that since Rasel didn't know about the change of beneficiary, he was convinced that he would receive the insurance after his wife's death. For the sake of profit, he decided to kill her, and then play the role of a grieving widower to avoid punishment. It seemed that the case had been solved, and on January 4, 2012, Mr. Rasel was arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder. Unable to post bail, which was set at $250,000, Rasel Faria ended up behind bars, where he had to wait for the start of the trial. The trial itself began in November 2013. The defendant's lawyer, Joel Schwartz, trying to defend his client, drew the jury's attention to serious inconsistencies in the case. He pointed out that neither on the man's body nor on his clothes were any traces of blood found. The prosecutor in turn said that after the murder, the man could have simply taken a shower and changed his clothes, literally. However, the lawyer believes his client didn't have time to do this. To support his claim, Joel Schwartz drew the jury's attention to the testimonies given by Rasel's friends. 4 men confirmed that the defendant was with them on the evening of Betsy's murder and only left for home at 9:00 p.m. In addition, the man's mobile phone was recorded that evening at the place where he went to grab a bite after meeting with his friends. According to the receipt found in Rasel's car, he made purchases at this place at 9:09 p.m. The drive from there to home should have taken Rasel about 23 more minutes. And the 911 call, I remind you, came in at 9:40 p.m., so the man had only 7 minutes to inflict 55 stab wounds on his wife, take a shower, change clothes, and hide the bloodied slippers in the closet. The lawyer believed that it was impossible to do all this in such a short period of time. And besides, according to footage from street surveillance cameras that recorded Rasel at one of the gas stations that day, he was wearing an orange t-shirt and jeans. He was wearing the same clothes when the police arrived at his house, so the man hadn't changed his clothes. And if he really had stabbed his wife multiple times, then his clothes would definitely have been soaked and simply covered in blood. But he was clean. To this, the prosecutor stated that Rasel's friends simply conspired with him and are trying to provide the man with an alibi. He suggested that the defendant could have briefly left his friends that evening and left them his mobile phone. The friends went to a cafe with the man's phone and bought food. It's very simple. This explains the presence of the receipt and the information that Rasel's phone was recorded at the cafe. At the same time, Rasel killed his wife, after which he returned to his friend's house. After some time, he went home and only then dialed 911. At the same time, the absence of blood on the suspect's clothes was explained by the prosecution with the argument that the man could have simply undressed right before killing his wife, then taken a shower and put his clothes back on. The police did not find any blood in the sewage system, or in general any evidence that would confirm the theory that after Betsy's death, someone in the Fari house used the shower. Despite this, on November 21, 2013, the jury found Rasel guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. At that time, journalists were already actively interested in the case. In February 2014, an article was published in one of the newspapers. It reported that the daughters of Betsy Faria had filed a lawsuit against Pamela Hupp. The plaintiffs claimed that the woman had appropriated all the payments she received after their mother's death. The article was quite lengthy, and in addition to this information, it also mentioned that throughout the investigation of Betsy Faria's murder, Pamela Hupp consistently gave law enforcement officers very, to put it mildly, contradictory testimonies. At first, she claimed that she said goodbye to Betsy near her house and then went home. Then she said that for a few minutes, she actually did go into the living room of the house. Then she changed her story again, claiming that she had spent some time in the victim's bedroom that evening. In addition to this, Hupp began to claim that she had a sexual relationship with Betsy, and Rasel, upon learning about this, got very angry with his wife the day before the murder. The woman also said that she recently remembered one important detail. According to her, when she drove Betsy home that day, she saw a car with Rasel and another unknown man sitting inside. The woman began to share all these details after it became known that shortly before Betsy's death, Pamela Hupp's phone was recorded near the Faria family's house. So, in light of these details, Rasel's defense filed a motion for a retrial. On June 15, 2015, the man was released on bail. During the new hearings, an expert testified that the letter found on Betsy's computer, in which the woman allegedly wrote about her husband's cruelty, was a fake. It appeared on the woman's computer 5 days before her death and was created in a program that had never been installed on that laptop. In fact, because of this, the expert concluded that it had been transferred there from another device, and most likely, the deceased didn't write it. The information that the style of the letter did not match the style in which Betsy usually wrote or spoke was also confirmed by her friends. In addition, during the trial, Rasel's lawyer began questioning Pamela Hupp about why she did not give the money received after Betsy's death to her 2 daughters. The woman replied that she put $100,000 into a trust fund for the girls. She gave the other $50,000 to her friend who has breast cancer. However, when Pamela found out that Rasel was sentenced to life imprisonment, she took the money out of the fund. To the logical question of why, Pamela said that the testimony and distrust of Betsy's daughters toward her upset her very much. That's how it was. In addition to this, at that time her own mother died from Alzheimer's disease. And Pamela, you see, needed money for the funeral. Besides, now while giving testimony, the woman changed her original story and claimed that Betsy herself, while she was still alive, supposedly told her that she didn't have to necessarily give the money to her daughters, but could use it, well, basically, as she saw fit. Shortly after Pamela gave this testimony, the sheriff's office received a report that Hupp's mother had actually died in October 2013. However, the anonymous source claimed that the real cause of her death was not an illness at all. Mrs. Shirley Neumann, Pamela's mother, lived on the 3rd floor of a retirement home. The woman had long suffered from dementia and arthritis. In this facility, she had the opportunity to be under constant supervision by medical staff. Pamela Hupp visited her mother from time to time. On October 29, 2013, Mrs. Shirley had severe back pain, so Pamela agreed to take her to the hospital. The daughter spent the day and night with her mother in the medical facility, and on October 30, around 5:00 p.m., Pamela brought Shirley back to her house. The next day at 2:30 p.m., Shirley was found dead under the balcony of her room. The police who arrived at the scene concluded that when the woman went out to get some fresh air on the balcony, she lost her orientation, couldn't keep her balance, and fell from a height, which resulted in her death. The fact that during Shirley's autopsy, a dose of tranquilizer was found in her blood that was 8 times higher than normal was not taken into account by the investigation at all. Shirley's life was insured, and Pamela Hupp, like her brothers and sisters after their mother's death, received $10,000 from the insurance company, as well as about $120,000 in investments that Shirley owned. So, the investigation was reopened after an anonymous letter was received. The police questioned the staff of the facility where Shirley lived, as well as one of her sons. They all assured that the deceased was very unstable and could have easily taken too many pills and then fallen. Eventually, after a repeated investigation, the detectives once again concluded that this death was an accident. However, considering the new circumstances of the case, in November 2015, the court still acquitted Rasel Fari and the man was released. But the law enforcement officers did not rush to arrest Pamela Hupp. Moreover, the court that considered the lawsuit of Betsy Fari's daughters took Pamela's side and allowed her to keep all the money she received after the woman's death. But attorney Joel Schwartz, who represented Rasel Faria, still believed in Mrs. Hupp's guilt. He continued to actively work on the case and insisted that prosecutors from the Eastern District of Missouri review the Betsy murder case. During a phone conversation with prosecutors, Joel Schwartz emphasized that if this was not done in time, new victims would soon appear. Regrettably, these words proved prophetic. On August 16, 2016, a call was received by 911 from a woman. She reported a burglary. The police immediately went to the address provided.
We responded to a call about an armed robbery. On the way, we were informed that the victim had shot the intruder. An active investigation is underway.
When the cops arrived at the house where the crime took place, they saw the body of 33-year-old Louis Gumpenberger on the floor in the hallway. He was a local resident who was in a car accident in 2005 and suffered serious injuries. He walked with a limp, and his left arm was almost useless. In addition, his cognitive abilities had significantly deteriorated. You could say that after the accident, Louis turned into a big child. The man hardly ever left his mother's house and only occasionally went out for short walks. So, after examining his body, the police found $900 and a note on him. It contained something like a plan, according to which the man was supposed to act during the attack.
Steal the Hupp, go with it to the bank and get the money at once. Then take it home and get rid of it. Do everything so that it looks like Rasel's wife. Make sure there's a knife sticking out of her neck.
For these actions, the author of the note promised Louis a reward of $10,000. Another participant in the event, namely the woman who was supposed to be attacked, as you have probably already guessed, turned out to be Pamela Kapp. The woman told law enforcement that shortly before the shooting, she was just returning home after shopping. Stopping near her house, Pamela saw a silver sedan pull up nearby, drop off Louis, and drive away. And the man himself walked toward Pamela. He had a knife in his hands and began demanding money from the woman, Rasel. And then he added that he planned to kill her. Then Pamela knocked the knife out of Louis's hands, ran into the house, grabbed a pistol from the bathroom, and started shooting at the attacker. Self-defense, but this time, dear prosecutors, they didn't believe Pamela's story. After all, the investigators managed to find enough evidence that, to put it mildly, strongly contradicted her story. Louis's condition and illness raised serious doubts about his capability to carry out the plan described in the instructions. Secondly, two local residents told law enforcement that a few days before Louis's murder, a woman who closely matched the description of Pamela Hupp approached them and introduced herself as a producer of the well-known crime television show Dateline. She offered the women $1,000 to play the role of a 911 dispatcher. The so-called producer hinted that it was necessary in order to film a scene for the next episode of the show. When the police reviewed the surveillance cameras in the area, they realized that the so-called producer was actually Pamela Hupp. After learning this, the investigators assumed that the woman could have convinced Louis in this way that she was filming another episode and asked the man to play the scene she needed in it. Several facts supported this version. Notably, Pamela's phone records revealed that she was near Louis' house an hour before the attack, further supporting this theory. Although earlier the woman claimed that she didn't know Louis at all and had never even seen him in her life. They also found a $100 bill in Pamela's house. Its serial number matched the money that was found on the body of the deceased. And another piece of evidence that proved the woman's guilt was that investigators managed to establish that the knife, which Pamela allegedly knocked out of Louis' hands, and the paper with the instructions that the attacker was supposed to follow were both purchased, oh what a surprise, by Pamela herself at one of the local stores. According to law enforcement, the motive for the crime was Pamela Hupp's desire to put Russell Ferry back in prison and thus finally divert any suspicion from herself regarding involvement in the murder of his wife. However, the woman greatly miscalculated, unaware of Louis' serious illness, and she thought that pinning everything on him would be quite easy. But because Louis' mental abilities were, well, significantly lower than most people, the police immediately assumed that he couldn't have attacked Pamela, and they began to actively investigate the case. On August 23, 2016, when all the evidence had been gathered, Pamela Hupp was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. During the interrogation, the woman requested to use the restroom. There, she stabbed herself in the neck and wrist with a ballpoint pen, attempting to end her own life. But the woman survived, and her survival became another piece of evidence of her guilt in the investigation. January 31, 2017. On this day, Pamela Hupp appeared before the court. The woman refused to admit her guilt. And then the prosecutors announced that they would seek the death penalty for the defendant. She was accused of 3 murders, with the victims being her friend Betsy, her mother Shirley Newman, and Louis Gumpenberger. However, in May 2018, the judge decided that the prosecutors had not provided enough evidence to link Pamela to her mother's death. Despite this, the evidence proving Pamela's guilt in the murder of Louis Gumpenberger was more than sufficient. The trial of the woman in this case was scheduled for June 2019. Trying to avoid the death penalty, Pamela agreed to plead guilty, and within a month, she was sentenced to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. In September of the following year, Pamela filed a motion to overturn her sentence. She claimed that she was pressured and essentially forced to plead guilty, but her request was denied. The investigation into Betsy's murder is still ongoing, dragging on for an extended period, in particular because a lot of mistakes were made during the first hearing of the case. Right now, Pamela alternates between admitting her guilt and denying it. She's like a Schrodinger's Pamela. The woman, in general, constantly changes her testimony, and her lawyers are doing everything they can just to drag the case out. It is currently known that the next court hearing in this case is scheduled for August 2026. What about the other participants in this story? Well, in 2019, Louis Gumpenberger's mother, Margaret Birch, won a lawsuit against Pamela Hupp. The court ordered the defendant to pay the victim $3 million. The woman is partially paying off this debt by working as a tutor at the Chillicothe Correctional Center, where she is actually serving her sentence. At the same time, Mr. Rasel received compensation of more than $2 million in March 2020 for his wrongful conviction. That's how it is, my dears. What can I say? Choose your friends wisely. That's how it is. Take care of yourselves, your family and loved ones, and I'll see you in the next video.